Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop Podcast. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Michael Moog Aguilar. Michael is currently the Director of Esports and Co-Curricular Innovation at University of Oklahoma. He has a great take on the collegiate esports space, what OU has done uniquely, talks a lot about the power of community in gaming and beyond. Let's talk to Michael. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop Podcast. All right, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop Podcast. Today is my pleasure to welcome my friend Michael Moog Aguilar. He is the Director of Esports and Co-Curricular Innovation at University of Oklahoma. Boomer Sooner, my friend, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, John.
My pleasure. So for today, we are suspending the Red River rivalry. Being here in Texas, I'm not a University of Texas alum, but I do live in Dallas, and
can't escape it.
I do actually have a funny story for you.
Sure.
So it just turns out that one of the best skate parks I've ever seen is in Norman, Oklahoma. And so I took a 3-hour drive there one day. 3-hour drive to skate for 2 hours before another 3-hour drive back. And after I finished skating, I looked up some local food places, some restaurants. And I said, I'll go find this place. It looks like it has some good sandwiches. So I walk in, and I didn't even realize it, but the Red River rivalry football game was on. And I looked up at the screen, and I said, oh, wow, it's tied. That's crazy. And then I looked at the time, and I said, holy crap, there's only 8 seconds left in this game. And then, whether it was a pass or a handoff, it went to the OU receiver or running back, whichever it was, and he ran all the way in for the touchdown. The place exploded.
Yeah.
And I was like, nobody needs to know where I'm from. I just started cheering with them.
That's the smart move. No, it's interesting, how that culture has been around forever. And my Oklahomies and my state right now, but we talk about a state that's predominantly oil and gas as its majority of its economy, which has only been hurt over the years. And so we latch on to our sports like no other, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun to be a part of. So as far as, latching on to sports to start off this conversation, have you seen that community, whether it's on campus or beyond campus in Oklahoma, have they latched on to esports, or is that looking further forward into the future?
There's some interesting convergences that are happening for sure, as I'm starting to work more and more with OU athletics, with student athletes being able to basically use their own names to start getting sponsorships and other things since the July 1 rulings from the NCAA. And with our program has such a heavy emphasis on media and influencer development as components of programs that we actually scholarship, the worlds are starting to collide a little bit in ideals. A perfect example, which I'm sure we'll elaborate on later, but as a touch point really quickly, is we know that when we talk about traditional sports in regards to the mainstream acceptance, them are not equals. And while we try to view our student athletes as equals in all comparisons, regardless of gender, regardless of sport, we know that football in this part of the country, you just can't touch it, in regards to the money it makes, the energy it comes, versus even our, national championship women's softball team, or usually our top 5 ranked, women's gymnastics teams. And so you don't get the same virality naturally with those different titles. But what you can do now with NIL is to start collaborating with them, give those student athletes other means to find their voice, their platform, become that role model, become, that next generation young kids, or as a prospect, maybe as a brand extension of a company that's also looking for influencer style medias and want to support something that's maybe not quite pro scene, that's just riddled with policy and high tier execution, and doing something a little bit more. Pretty cool convergences are coming. And then naturally, there's the gameplay itself, being a football school more than anything, Learfield kind of getting in the space last year as a COVID response, or last 2 years as a COVID response, heavily focused on Madden. And so I think that it's a weird convergence, Overwatch, a Rocket League, of Valorant. And then you have, athletics worlds, what they think is 2K and Madden and FIFA. And the problem is that from a cultural standpoint, you have the jocks over here that were still the people that punched the nerds in the face for playing video games. Mm-hmm. So you have to, through through intentional execution of figuring out what culture works, demographics, and then how to reduce some of those societal things that produce those barriers.
The DLC Drop podcast is sponsored by Ice Shaker. I've been a huge fan of this brand for the past few years, ever since I met founder Chris Gronkowski. What I love about this product is the brand story, the functionality, and the customization. Ice Shaker is a Shark Tank company invested in by Mark Cuban and Alex Rodriguez, owned by NFL players Rob Gronkowski and Chris Gronkowski. I love using my Ice Shaker anytime I'm driving to the podcast studio, I'm going skateboarding, or I'm at the gym. No matter what I'm doing, it just does a great job of keeping my drinks hot or cold. The customization for Ice Shaker is something that's super unique. You can get any name, just about any logo engraved onto your Ice Shaker and delivered to you within just 3 to 5 business days. Get your own DLC Drop branded Ice Shaker at iceshaker.com/DLC Drop. Save 20% on all Ice Shaker products with the discount code DLC Drop. Yeah, I really love that perspective on traditional sports. As we look at the kids on campus as far as an interest of sports and gaming beyond esports, of course, are you seeing any either differentiation or a pull from traditional sports into kids who are more focused on games? Or are students on campus just as interested in softball and football and have now added this gaming interest, as I believe just about everybody on a college campus is a gamer nowadays?
Pretty much 65%, pretty much unanimous now. That's a pretty big percentage. I would say that it's definitely, I wish that certain things would be more black and white, but I think this is very convoluted. I think a big portion is the part of the country that we're in as well, coupled with the fact that we're a Division I Power 5 university, as well as a Tier 1 research campus as well. So those things all compound to different cultural things that cannot entirely be translated to a community college or even a D2, D3 school or JUCO school or NIA school. Again, between OU's campuses, we have 3 different campuses: Norman, which is the primary one we all known for, our Health Science Center in OKC, and then our Tulsa expansion. And we also are comprised of around 30,000 students and around 10,000, 8 to 10,000 staff, faculty, and abroad. So when we try to quantify that data, one, it's challenging because it is very diverse. And at the same time, the wonderful response I have to that is that the answer is yes to all. But I wouldn't strategically or intentionally say that it's exclusively one more than the other in regards to those two kind of scenarios. Yeah. So we are seeing bleed over from traditional athletics pipeline students, and we are seeing a little bit of convergence from those that would be more the introverted gamer stereotype that now care a little bit more about the traditional athletics form. So I think that over time and maturity, that will continue to scale up. But for now, I wouldn't call it a metric that I have my eyes on.
Gotcha. Now, as I'm going back in my memory as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking back to when we first met when I was at GameStop and I was leading partnerships and working to figure out esports. And one of our targets there was college. And I remember you being one of my first phone calls there and just coming away with like, oh my goodness, this guy, Michael, really knows what he's doing. He's got a very, I would say, unique perspective on the space. And there were some things that OU was able to do, whether just at that time, or maybe you're still the only ones doing this, but there were some ways that you were operating the esports space differently than other universities. Can you talk a little bit about your unique approach and what you were able to do?
Yeah. So this is actually a little bit of a segue. Give me some history on me, and this will help explain why I built the program the way I did. So I've been a gamer since the mid 80s. I got my Atari 2600 in West Germany when the wall was still up. Wow. Military brat. And so that was the first experience. And gaming became the epicenter of the household because we're in foreign soil. My brother and sister both played soccer at the time. I was too young. And so I naturally went to gaming and sci-fi and cartoons. So, but I always remember we would sit down and we would play games together. My parents would watch, so it was a really interesting and unique story to have that support early on. Moving into my teenage years back in the U.S., Dad retired at Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma. And so we're still kind of before the broadband launching age. Brood War hasn't come out. StarCraft hadn't come out yet. And so I remember obviously getting my next consoles, which was Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and moving forward. So the biggest thing, the most important milestone, I think, in my head was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when World of Warcraft came out. And it was one of those things where I really enjoyed it. I was able to overcome a lot of my own social anxieties, my own introverted nature, and really kind of just enjoy a game with other people for once and on a bigger scale. And so became a raid leader, guild master, and even got to the point of marrying people inside of the game, and then coming to Oklahoma City, hosting them for a WoW BQ, as we called it at the time. And really just enjoying camaraderie, despite still being very anxious socially and introverted. And I'll never forget the picture that it painted, and the picture that we took at one of them, where there's this photo of my guildmates there's probably about 30 of us total in this photo. And in the photo, you have people that are in a wheelchair, you have every skin tone under the sun, you have, gender representation, you have religious representation, blue collar, white collar, adults, children, single parents, double parent households. You have this perfect kind of microcosm of what gaming represented. So that became extremely important to me, because I became everyone's counselor. I became, the social conduit for everyone, trying to help put out fires, help give advice, help listen, just do that. And which started to spark the ideals of mental health and understanding the community aspect and how vital it was to, one, making sure that my networks and my friends that I valued were okay and healthy, or as healthy as I can get them. And then two, that they can also feel needed and wanted and welcomed, regardless of whatever adjective we put over their head.
Yeah.
So there was a gap between that moment and then 10 years later, where basically the CIO of IT for OU came back from an Amazon summit and basically asked, what the heck is Twitch? And that's what started the entire OU journey. And so going from that World of Warcraft story was so important, because I knew no matter what I wanted to build, that community had to be the epicenter at all costs. Without the community, it becomes this cold, exclusive topic, which is kind of the opposite of what education should be about. And this is where a lot of the differences between me and my collegiate peers come into place. I took the burden on trying to satisfy the needs and wants of every gamer. I didn't care if they were competitive, if they were casual, if it was Animal Crossing or Halo. I wanted to listen, hear, and see what I could do to enable a space for them, whether that be digital or physical, for them to feel welcome. And the way that I did that was through three different metrics, or three different gradable, kind of my compass. The first was a student voice. If I couldn't find students that were willing to do at least 50% of the work, then it was a moot point. It wasn't going to go anywhere, because you can't make students do what you want them to do. It's just not going to happen. They barely read emails. It's hard to motivate them. They have to be self-motivated.
Yeah.
But they don't know how to connect those dots from a business standpoint. And that's where I came in. So it's a matter of saying, let me take care of, here's how we need to operate. Here's the scope of what the university's policies are. So as long as we stay within this window, we can do whatever we want. And so students started to understand that and started to embrace the idea of building instead of just playing games with their friends, understanding how to build infrastructure. So the second metric that we used, or compass, was the university mission. Whatever was the mission of the statement, or whatever strategic plan was being released, we had to use that as a reference to stay aligned, because at the end result, as this extrapolates over time or grows over time, I didn't want it to be a growth on the surface of OU. I wanted it to be actually a component of its nervous system, where people know where to go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that, a lot of times when you're counterculture, or you're kind of a subculture, you could say, yeah, it's a group that wants to be their own thing.
Right.
But I think it's important, while we want to establish our own identities with our own communities and things, is understanding where can growth come from, and how can we enable growth from both sides, right? And so it sounds like with your experience and your approach here is you're saying, hey, the way that this is going to grow and be most successful is if it is actually part of OU, rather than we're just on campus and we're completely separate. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The third and final point was, what was the industry doing? If you look at an Evil Geniuses org chart, or who they hire, what are the jobs that they're actually employing?
Yeah. That's
the industry. The 5 people, 6 people on stage or less that are competing, That's the small drop in the bucket. That's the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah.
But the meat that makes Evil Geniuses run, or a TSM or a Cloud9 or any of these organizations, whether they be traditional esports competition or 100 Thieves, Nate Shot will tell you that he's a media company as well as a merchandising company alongside esports.
Yeah.
He's not exclusively an esports company. And that's important for the diversification of building those pipelines. But that also is the responsibility and job of entities like educational systems like mine that is supposed to create the professionals of the today and tomorrow, especially when we have the foresight about tomorrow. So those three kind of compass, points were what's built us from the very beginning in 2016, 2017, as I was getting started. And it's been insane, the growth in regards to the entire sector. When I started in 2016, less than 20 universities, and the first Power 5 had elevated the same week, which was AJ Dimmick at Utah. And then now in 2022, we're over 400 universities with institutional support of some type. So that's explosive growth. And so I faced every kind of adversity from administration that you can imagine, especially one being at a bigger university that's just ridden with politics and red tape and things like this for good reasons. Universities like OU or UT or Texas Tech or Baylor, we don't get any passes in the media.
Right.
If something happens on our campus, it's at the very least regional news.
Sure.
And oftentimes, depending on how egregious it is, can be national news. So that's taking a game like Call of Duty, for instance, and putting that logo on it, and it's the more toxic nature of it is a massive liability concern, and just the optics of the university. And so those things have to be matured. They have to be mentored. They have to be coached, and saying, hey, that's where mental health and psychology comes in as an opportunity of just saying, guys, you're getting triggered, you're getting tilted. It's okay to be human and have human responses. It's about what you do with that emotional response that defines who we are as a brand and how you are as a player and how we function as a team. If we can overcome that, I'll support Call of Duty all day. And we struggled with it last year when it was our first year. But now, not a problem at all. They understand that if they can bite their tongue and vent to us on the inside versus on the outside, it's a much better day the next day. Versus, collegiate directors now having to drop, basically statements, basically saying we don't condone this kind of support. We now, no different than when an athlete steps out or, professional, we see them all the time, the nice 1920 by 1080 personal statement or mission statement or a statement of intention on Twitter after something happens. We're having to do that now too.
Yeah. So when you talk about a brand and you talk about that logo, I remember one of the unique things with OU Esports was the ability to use the OU logo with the esports team, which is very rare. Talk a little bit about what brought that to fruition and what the result of that has been, both challenges and also opportunities.
I think this is one of the definitely a unique story for us in our timeline, as I've had the logo for utilization now since early fall 2018. And originally started as the OU Esports Club, which you can't see it, but it's this jersey over here. And now it's just OU Esports as a full department, just like OU Athletics. And the wonderful thing with that is that I had decently progressive and innovative people within the licensing department. And my Learfield reps at OU are they like to communicate, like they're actively communicating, which I know is not the case for all campuses. So we sat down, I only had 2 meetings really. We sat down and said, these are the intentions, this is a timeline, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And they said, all right, well, how about this? We will kind of pilot your ability to use the logo for a year. And as long as we don't have any problems or violations or anything that we can't correct physically, we'll make it more of a standardized thing, which led us into a VP of the University Dean of Students elevating it to a department. So now it's unreversible. At that point. But the biggest proposal in that is just saying that this is not a student-led initiative anymore. It never truly was exclusively a student-led initiative. I wanted students along the way and to be mentored and also contribute actively through its development, even past the departmental stages. I wanted them actively developing this, to take ownership of this, because culturally they're better aligned with the current consumption and the future of what this industry represents. However, I understand more about how academia works and the business world works and things like this. And when you're vulnerable and humble enough to be able to listen and understand both sides, then it makes you very formidable. And you can joke in that, you can, from the age difference, just I'm almost 40 now in March. And some of my students are less than half my age.
Yeah.
So not treating that as an opportunity of elitism and treating that as an opportunity of vulnerability is what's helped me gain favor with a lot of students, because there's things I know that you won't. There's things that I can do that you can't. However, that doesn't devalue you in this equation. That's just my part of the formula. I need you to get to that sum of all parts, period. There is no other way that I do it. And that's allowed me to find some amazing student champions that have helped me build OU's program using me as the lead. Yeah,
I love that idea of empowering younger people and helping to guide them, and then also leaning on what they bring to the table as well. How much would you say that your commonality with your students, just being gamers, has increased the level of your relationship with them?
I think it's helped a ton. Back to school, I think it was kind of a beautiful kind of esports developer, director, dad, uncle moment where, back to school is a fun time. You get to meet your incoming freshman class, a big group of them, and help them kind of find their places, or at least give them the idea of what this can represent if they subscribe to this community or whatnot. And I remember sitting down with a group of students they're all freshmen. And the first beautiful thing about this moment is that there was 3 of them. They were playing Monster Hunter on the Switch, and all 3 of them hadn't known each other until that day. So that was the first kind of win moment, because that was the whole point. The second one is I sat down with my Switch and I said, well, first of all, I don't know anything about this game. Would you guys mind sharing just a little bit? Not trying to have to teach me everything, just sharing what's going on the screen right now, basically. And so they did. And in that moment, they were all now feeding off of each other. I was learning. And at the same time, now I know those students, and now one of those students has applied for a leadership role because they helped break that ice. And so that's it's definitely been a moment where, for me, and I think this is what's actually kept me feeling younger in my own just lifestyle, is that I understand that being the old guy on the block has its disadvantages and it has its advantages, and embracing all of it, not being ashamed of any of it, and then understanding that I don't just because I'm further along in my journey and career does not put me in a place of supremacy. It puts me in a place of leveraging that wisdom as a means to help elevate and develop them, so that when they do graduate and they spread their wings, they don't crash and burn. They crash and burn while they're here, so that when they do have a livelihood that depends on them, the kid, future kids or significant other, or household, that if they do falter, they'll know how to take a punch and keep rolling, which is one of those life lessons that we all wish we could learn earlier in life, of how to fail and how to recover from it.
Yeah, if you fail when you're younger and you have help with people helping you deal with failure, then when you're older and you don't have that safety net, you've gained the ability and the skills to deal with those things. I love how you're talking about your age. You and I are very close in age. My 39th birthday will be in April, so we're not too far away. One of the things that I've found that's really beneficial for myself, and I think this is the same in your life as well, is kind of being in between 2 groups of people who can't really talk to each other, but they need each other, and you're that translator. Exactly. I found myself being that person in business, and it sounds like you're that person on campus where you can speak the language of the administrators and you can speak the language of the student gamers. Talk a little bit about that value and what that's enabled you to be able to do.
So that was a Mr. Miyagi moment, actually, and it's absolutely true. If I was to say what was one of the biggest skill sets I've learned is patience and then translation. And I was actually my mom who taught me that skill without realizing it, because my mom is absolutely not tech savvy. My dad, however, is. But both my dad was a professor, my mom was a speech therapist in the public schools. So I'm a 3rd generation educator, 3rd generation service member. And I've been a public servant, in multiple different instances as well. And so in that journey, I've had to always be that translator. And so I was the techie. And granted, I work for OU in IT, and I still do that on top of the directorship. But I was the guy in IT that would go out of my way and say, well, cool, this is the phone I want. And then I would go buy the opposite. So if I had an Android as my primary, I'd have an iOS at the same time, because it helped me translate what was going on, knowing that this demographic used this, device or this tech. And that was a skill set I acquired way before this journey, but it was as simple as that. Not that anyone can just go and afford to buy some of these devices. It's ridiculous how they've gotten. But the point is that when you can translate back and forth, understanding academia, understanding the analytics that the older generation or the administrative, tier cares about versus what the Gen Z audience or Gen Alpha audience even values is absolutely probably one of the most important skill sets, because one of the things that really helped me kind of get over my extensively introverted nature was my 2019 TED Talk, where if anyone watches that, my voice cadence is all over the place because I'm really nervous.
Yeah.
But after I went back and it was published and I rewatched it, in that moment, I realized that my voice is no longer about me. My voice represents all those students that I'm now fighting for to legitimize this topic, and the 8-year-old version of me that wished this stuff existed already.
Yeah.
So that, from a psychological standpoint, has really pushed me forward into understanding my power and really utilizing the privileges that I've worked for and how to benefit others through them.
I love that. So speaking of translating to different groups of people, I think just about every student sees value in there being an esports or a gaming club or representation on campus. How have you effectively translated to the administrators and the leadership at the school to communicate this is the value that universities receive from having gaming and esports clubs or scholastic integration?
Yeah, so there's multiple fronts on this. So I'm trying to keep this quick because it can get really long-winded. But the very first one that I did was when we formalized the gaming community aspect, which was 2017. Having the MBA background really helped me here in the business kind of analytical thinking of logistics. When we created the registration form, we made sure that we were capturing data that, one, was legal to capture, but two, basically kind of the keys to the kingdom of data analytics for us, which is the student ID. So in that, I was able to advocate for access and running reports to that student ID. So now I didn't have to sit there and extract all this stuff out of a student. I just wanted to know their name, their IGN, their OU email, their shirt size, and OU ID. Really simple one-page form. Anyone can fill it out in less than a second. And in that one form, as people were registering, now we had the ability of putting analytics to this. I can tell you on a day-to-day basis the gender breakdown of my communities, at least in a pretty decent sample size.
Yeah.
So that was able to make it irrefutable. This is impacting these demographics. There's a heavy STEM emphasis. There are women involved. There are international students involved, which international students are one of the hardest topics to interact with outside of international programs because they're so stifled often by language barriers that they rarely make friends outside of the same cultural students that come here with each other.
Right.
And so overcoming that is a challenge, but gaming allows to do that, especially games like League of Legends and Genshin Impact right now, which is allowing me to tap into both the gaming and esports realms differently. So that was kind of the first kind of huge milestone, but that was day one. Like that was the idea from the very beginning, and being able to run that report is also one of those things that helped the logo argument, the departmentalization argument, because I can tell you who we are, and not only who we are, I can tell you specifically who's involved, and that makes it just it's a moot point to argue at that point. It's not a trend; they want it. Yeah. So one of the next things that we did was when we started to expand our programs, we started to build basically 6 pillars of intention. The first one being leadership. Naturally, students are leading the charge. They're getting mentored. They're sitting in conversations. If I have a business proposal or anything, students are invited to sit on that. Depend whether or not the level of that relationship, they may be involved in the actual interactions with it, but they are allowed to sit and shadow basically in real-time business conversations. And because I want them to have that firsthand experience. I don't care if it's a meeting that goes sour, they need to see that too. And so that's it. So if I ever have any vendors that come at me and I tell them, hey, I'm going to invite students to come in this is my leadership, and they ever give me pushback, that's not my vendor. Period. Because I'm an institution of learning, and everything is an opportunity for learning. The second pillar, which is the absolute most important, is the community pillar for us. And the reason why I have so much emphasis, aside from the obvious ones we already talked about, is most of these colleges and universities are building these esports programs that are focused on competition. Yeah. At least as the primary focus and emphasis. 75% of their energy is poured into that at a minimum. And my problem with that is that who are the fans of those teams for those universities?
Good question.
Just because I'm OU doesn't mean that my entire community is going to be a fan of it. They'll be more inclined to at least open it because of that brand, but that doesn't mean they're going to be a fan of it. So if I don't build a community to be the fans of my teams, I'm not building strong alumni for the future. I'm not building, you never know what the networking is going to show you as those students become professionals and start businesses or on their career paths and align with other things. So the community emphasis was such a big deal because it sets the tone for everything else. And it allowed me to build a culture that is inclusive and protects itself. It's now self-regulating. If somebody steps out, spam or anything like this, it gets called out, it gets rectified usually within 5 minutes to 10 minutes. It's insane how quick it's gotten. But that's the dream, is having a self-regulating community that only needs micro adjustments over time to stay healthy and inclusive, and understand that you can have differences and still be friends. That we need more of that in society in general.
That's what I was going to say. How are you teaching that?
that one is just saying, here, use gaming as your North Star. And if that is it, then it really doesn't matter. It's just a grounds to have a conversation about our differences, not as a means to separate us. Because I don't care if you're one political party or the other, if you both play Genshin Impact, why does that political party matter as much in that moment? It doesn't.
Right.
So stick to that as a glue of just saying, hey, I actually enjoy having people to play with. So I need to understand that I have to understand the balance of give and take, because they're equal components. That in itself is just an organic cultural byproduct of things I've learned over the years, and it's absolutely in fruition here. So the third pillar, news and media, we had to tell our own story. We had to be our own Kotaku. We had to be our own ESPN. We had to do all those things. So I have basically a media team and a news team. They write articles. They do event coverage. They do montages. These students have created documentaries about our development. Now 2 episodes of them that are about 20 minutes long each that I didn't ask for. It's all student initiative. But imagine you get to write a resume that has an OU logo on it in your portfolio that says, I created a documentary of a brand new department on the service of a D1 Power 5. So
that's priceless. Yeah,
exactly. So the next one is our production division. We have to shoutcast our own games. In the earlier years, it was really kind of broken. It's still not perfect now. In fact, we just saw College COD basically put it into their guidelines that now all games can be streamed without permission from the other team. Unless College COD is streaming it themselves, then they have exclusive rights to those streams. Otherwise, stream at will, which we want to see more of, because it allows us to elevate more shoutcasters, more production people, more lighting engineers, sound engineers, things like this, which is, again, part of the industry that's needed. The fifth one, which is still kind of, I still call it beta, despite it being 3 to 4 years old now, is our influencer development division. That focuses on building those students that aren't necessarily focused on the sweatiest or hardcore gameplay, but they understand how to engage a community. They know how to entertain. They know how to leverage brand power and understand timing of and a cadence to stay, on top of a community and help build their own brands. So now we're starting to basically authorize utilization on private streams that the OU logo as basically no different than like a Valkyrie streaming for 100 Thieves. Same exact scenario. And then the last one, intercollegiate esports, we're currently developing 14 teams across 12 different titles. Now, the beauty of this and what made this work is that all 6 of these pillars have now been in execution since late 2017, early 2018. All 6 of them are now scholarship enabled as of this school year. So that was really kind of the huge milestone for me in legitimizing the fact that the industry needs all these types of professionals to sustain itself. We can't just focus on the gameplay. And the other thing too is that this industry changes on a dime. We saw some pretty big news from Microsoft today that should be transformative in a lot of different ways, especially with Call of Duty, more than probably any of those other titles on there, and then Overwatch second. Yeah. So that's that's how we approached it, and doing that allowed us to be extremely inclusive. When we talk about the community pillar, the largest student-led community now, which is OU Gaming Club, which we now sponsor as a department that we birthed all of this from, is now 2,700 members deep. Wow. And on the development side, all 6 pillars of actual development is over 210 students.
That's incredible.
And 45 of them are under scholarship.
I hear you talking a lot about community from the very beginning when you were, playing World of Warcraft. You're developing these friendships across the globe. Obviously, what you're doing on campus here. Can you give our audience a few keys on how to develop a community if they haven't done so yet?
I think the biggest one is understanding how to listen. We always walk into any scenario. Your first interaction, you have your preconceived notion about somebody, how they handle themselves, how they carry their language, how they form their sentences, how they string together their thoughts. And the problem with this is that, again, this is a unique scenario coming from somebody who started this journey in my mid to kind of late or early 30s, and still talking to 18-year-olds. But I have to remember, one of the things that I always laugh at with adults and parents especially is obviously our priorities change over time, and the things that we value and the things that we have to protect and fight for. However, we were still 18 at some point. Yes. And you have to remember what the world looked like at 18. You thought it was actually broad and wide. And as you get older, it gets kind of smaller over time as dots connect and you see how things work. And it's hard to translate that to somebody who has a 15-year, age difference between them.
True.
But that's where it's so important to listen, because it'll help you come back to that earlier time of your life and just say, you know what, I hadn't learned that lesson yet. So instead of trying to just be teacher all the time, at least as a direct attack approach, you understand how to bake that into the execution of what you do. So you hear 18, 19-year-old, sophomore, freshman come in and bright-eyed, starry-eyed, sitting on top of a hill, even though they feel like the small fish in the pond, but they just don't know enough about what they can and can't do yet.
Yeah.
And what the biggest thing you need to do is not stifle that dream, because so many of us have forgotten how to dream.
True.
And embracing that as an opportunity to really feel the inspiration from them. And that's, again, I think part of the recipe of what makes me feel young still at almost 40, despite my hips and my knees.
I can relate.
But at the same time, to see the glow in the 18 and 19-year-olds' face, because one, they've been heard, two, they've been enabled. And not only that, now they've been able to take, ownership of something on a big scale. I have a 22 or 21-year-old that can use the OU logo and Twitter's without having to ask anybody.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that, because of that trust, because of that, the relationship building, and then understanding that it's a two-way street in communication. And then it's the other thing of teaching them humility on top of the empathy. And the humility component is just a simple statement of saying, you don't know everything.
Yeah.
Neither do I. But it requires both of those statements in the same phrase, because at that point, I don't look at my students, again, it's not a point of supremacy, it's a point of equality, of just saying, if I grew up in a different part of the world, I would look at the world completely different than you.
True. And
there's nothing wrong with that. But, and that's no different than being 15 years in advance. Every generation's had their struggles. Gen Z has COVID. We had 9/11, the 80s for the Gen X, and then, Vietnam and everything else prior to that. We all had our individual struggles and we all had to deal with it. I couldn't imagine not walking the stage for my high school graduation.
Right.
But yet I have sophomores that have that scenario, or going to prom. Even if I was an anxiety-ridden, teenager with pimples all over my face and sitting on the wall as a wallflower, it was still an iconic moment and a rite of passage.
Right.
So you can't go back and unlearn that entirely in your own journey. So being sensitive to the idea that not only is it a socioeconomic difference or a religious difference or a heritage-based difference, it's everything is a difference opportunity, and it's not necessarily a topic that will cause us to rift. It's really more of a topic, an opportunity to cause us to get closer when you approach diversity properly and embrace it and understand that change is a normal element in everyday equations, not just a random thing that's like, oh man, I guess I got to change again today. No, be excited about change. Be excited about those things. And then you kind of stay lively because of it. More agile.
One thing that I'm kind of blows my mind, I'm glad I wasn't around when I was in junior high and high school, is social media. I think about adding on top of all of the drama that was already there. Susie's following this person and no longer following you. I only got so many likes. They have 5,000 followers. Why am I losing followers?
We're
Comments.
Top 8 in MySpace at best.
Exactly. So when you're talking about listening, I think one of the other keys too is listening and speaking to younger people in the ways that they do. Discord being one of those things. Discord is relatively new. Can you share a little bit about how you've been able to utilize that effectively?
Yeah. So this actually goes into a scholastic component too. But with Discord, in the first year, it was a walled garden Discord. We didn't let anyone in unless they were verified. So they could join the Discord. We put the links out there. Once they registered, they gain access to the rest of the Discord. So it wasn't like there's a rules section and you submit your student. We verified it. Mm-hmm. So we protected that community at all costs. At the very least, you knew everyone that was in that server was a student at OU, period. And in 2019, we gained partnership with Discord and opened it up as we were getting ready to announce scholarships, knowing that it would draw in high school perspectives, which it absolutely has.
Cool.
So this Discord is absolutely all over the place. It's a little bit unruly because we have so many different channels for so many different communities. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that the majority of those communities that are established, that we list as established communities, they're actively active. Like that was the point. So it warrants our ability to do that. And one of the things that I pushed back with students and we've had conversations and they ended up winning was, I wanted it to be where this Discord can be a little intimidating when you have like 30 channels, 40 channels, and you have all these different color codes and different ranks and these different things. And I wanted to simplify it, thinking about the context of it being, from me as a 39-year-old now, or 38-year-old at the time, 37, versus an 18-year-old. And then I have to remember that says I'm the more tech savvy portion of the millennial generation.
True.
So this is my threshold. But at 18, if I was born into this, I can't imagine how much easier that is for them to process.
Yeah.
So at the same time, what I wanted to do is like saying, if I'm a fan of Apex and I hit Apex in there, it only shows me the Apex channel after that fact. But they're like, no, we just want to open to everyone, because by letting people know those channels exist, they will be inclined to go and visit those channels. Otherwise, they'll forget that they have to go back to rules or roles and reconfigure those things. Again, students making those decisions and me letting go of it and saying, okay, and it served us well. 2,700 members deep.
That's really smart. Yeah, you go back to being a translator and listening, right? And so what you're doing here is you're empowering the group who's going to be using it to dictate how it's being used so that it is in fact used. When a lot of times when we try to get people to do stuff in an unnatural way, it just ends up not being used at all, rather than saying, hey, why don't you help me understand how you would best use this, and then you adopt that. Speaking of humility, that's something that's coming from you in that experience. I think that's great.
Yeah. The other side of that, before I move on, the other side of that is that when COVID hit, most of these schools are using things like a D2L or a Canvas, kind of mechanism to facilitate curriculum and learning. The problem with those things is those things are not organic to it. They're a good repository for light touch interaction, but they're not meant for deeper dives. And so we saw an uptick across any campus, but at OU, I had over probably 20 different faculty reach out. That's where the co-curricular innovation component comes from. Reach out to say, can I use Discord as a means to facilitate classes and build community? And I said, absolutely. Can you teach us what we need to get started to protect ourselves and our students? Yes. Yeah. And those schools, I started with the faculty that had TAs, because the TAs, they caught onto that really quickly, or they already knew how.
For sure.
So at this point, they're like, wait a minute, you want me to use my Discord knowledge to all of a sudden? And then at that same point, now they were the fan favorite faculty, because their classrooms were helping avoid some of the Zoom burnout and the Canvas burnout and things like that. So we deployed it, and a lot of faculty are still using it today, despite us being back on premise. In fact, my class uses Discord as a backbone too, actively during curriculum. So those, but it's nice to see that also as another means of, again, being a growth in the nervous system of the university versus on top of it, actually empowering how we do day-to-day operations through our culture.
That's really cool. That's another benefit to universities, is utilizing the consumer behavior of gamers who greatly make up the student body to communicate to them more effectively, because that's the channel and the source that they're using anyway to talk to each other. So you're going to them, you're increasing, that communication. I think that's fantastic. As we only have about 15 minutes here, I want to get to one more topic as time flies talking to you, my friend. Sure. And that is pathways to careers through esports and gaming. And this is another benefit with universities is you can use it as a recruiting tool. You can also open the eyes of young people of what they can do for the rest of their lives in a way that taps into their passion and is relevant to them. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this is a great one, because again, this is another one that I wonderfully love, that it's not a black and white answer. In my 2019 TED Talk, I kind of prefaced the title of that as Esports in Higher Education, the Perfect Landscape for Development. Because we have tons of resources on our campuses. We have labs, we have curriculum, we have research opportunities, we have staffing, we have different other amenities that can benefit students in general as an infrastructure before we even talk about gaming and esports culture. So when we talk about an opportunity for K through 12 and youth, I am a big proprietor that not everyone needs to go to college. And sure, I butt heads with my own administration sometimes whenever I say that. I don't care. because we also know that higher education has only gotten more expensive and kind of out of control more expensive. Yeah. So we have to do a better job about adding more value to that investment to make it worth it.
Good point.
And the other component of it is also understanding that education in regards to a degree or an undergrad or a master's or a doctorate is just another tool in the toolbox. It is not exclusively the only tool that you call upon to be successful.
True.
You have to network. You have to get some experiences. You have to gain, some cuts and bruises along the way to be that battle-hardened employee that can work and make your own decisions and take control of your career path. So that's always my lesson whenever I am even in recruitment or even current students is like, guys, if you're failing, maybe this isn't the right move for you, or maybe it's not the right move for you right now.
Yeah.
I went to college right after high school and I bombed horribly. I was not mentally mature or ready for this. And then
I dropped out, went skateboarding, and then came back. Yeah.
Yeah. I went and enlisted in the military, and then 9/11 happened, and then I woke up real quick. So
wow.
26, or when I was 26, 27, then I finished my undergrad and my master's back to back. But I also saw the value in them at that time. I didn't see that at 18.
Same.
I was just told this is the way that it should go. And that's kind of the first kind of lesson I talk about when we talk about this. The second is that we have schools that are developing certificate programs. We have schools that are developing degrees, majors, minors, and things like this. I don't have any negative anything to say about all those things, except some of these things may need to be stalled out a little bit more or pushed harder. So when I come to certificate programs, I get it. They make a lot of sense. They have good value, especially if you build a good team. We shared that experience at SMU recently. But at the same time, being an adjunct isn't a way of life. It's not.
You're telling me. I taught one semester. I was like, I don't have time for this.
That's the nature of adjuncting in higher education. Another component that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
As you're spinning up new ideals and thought for curriculum and teaching. So that's one hurdle that higher education already has in its own way. But that certificate byproduct to the student does have its value because you can expose them to a lot of things really fast. But again, in that type of environment, which majority of those certificate programs are digital almost exclusively, you're missing the bigger component, which is experience, the actual hands-on ability to do those things.
Right.
Learning and getting lectured at and understanding philosophy and technique, there's nothing wrong with that, but it can't exclusively be your journey in trying to be a marketable professional. So when we start talking about degrees, then the schools start to change their narrative a bit and now are getting a little more hands-on and involved. So for me, I personally am not trying to take OU down a path where we're building majors and minors maybe for another 3 to 5 years at earliest. The biggest reason goes back to that compass that I used, that third compass point, which is go ask any of those employees at Evil Geniuses what degrees they have, and none of them have the word esports in it.
Right.
So that time will eventually come. But the other problem from the context of ethical behavior as an institution of learning is that if I put out an esports degree, it's going to be buzzworthy. So that means 17, 18-year-olds are going to be like, oh, mom and dad, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go and get into $100,000 worth of debt or more or less to get this degree because I think that's going to get me a job in the space. What I should be doing is promoting these traditional tracks, which we can all reference inside of it. Yeah. If I'm doing production for an esports event or a sporting event, traditional sports event, how much difference truly is there in understanding how to do production, screen overlays, infographics, and all that? There's not much.
Right.
It's the cultural component of what's actually being aired that's different. So that's a creative media production degree at OU. I don't need to change any of it. What I can do, however, is augment it with elective course options along it so that they can either go down a traditional broadcast path or more of a live stream path or more of a singular podcast or a single entity path. And you can shape your degree to focus on you. And then when you graduate, you don't have an esports degree in media management. You have a creative media production degree that has an emphasis in sports production or esports production or this. Yeah. And if you can't land a job in the esports world and ESPN comes and knocking for traditional sports, you can drop the emphasis and there's nothing unethical about it. And you're not siloed with this debt bill or bill of debt and no translatable skill sets to them.
That's a great point.
I want to always make it so that students are not siloing themselves. There is a negative connotation of being too much of a Swiss Army knife. Yeah. But and you don't specialize even just a little bit, though, you have no direction. And that was my journey, is that I became a Swiss Army knife to the max. And I could do so many different things that I absolutely was not a master of any of them until the last 5-6 years of my life that I feel like. And but to have something that's a little bit more passionate, something that can come out of it, I want to do production. Great. Well, learn these techniques and then you get a choice.
Right.
You get the choice of picking, I want to go in traditional sports. I want to go into NASCAR or Formula E or A or you know, whatever, or MLS or NBA or NFL, or maybe it is esports. Maybe I want to go work in Riot's production team or Overwatch League. Hopefully they get some rebirth again from today's news. COD League, you know, those types of things all become the sea of choices for you versus if I just get something that says esports degree on it, all I have is the debt and this area that is expanding, and we all know it's growing, but it's not fully grown yet. And so you might miss that curve.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that if it's too specific, you might miss out on opportunities that are outside of that narrow vertical. I've talked to a number of people who have said, John, should there be esports specific degrees or certifications or these other things? And I have a very similar response to that you have, which is there's so much overlap with traditional sports, traditional broadcasting, traditional events, and esports. There's just a couple of little things that are slightly different. Like with marketing, the way that you market to this group, you really have to add much more value than just having an awareness play like you can in traditional sports. Do you also see it as being a great recruitment tool, essentially from the perspective of, hey, Johnny, you can get your marketing degree at OU, and guess what? You market OU esports live events as part of your degree. Is that? I see that as the kind of evolving landscape I'm currently in now that we're offering scholarships, and now that we're getting more in tune with our admissions and recruitment divisions and things like this, getting more synergy in our program. My biggest thing with that is that I want to make, whenever I have a sit down with a student, and that's one of the most amazing journeys now, is to go and actually recruit students and sit there and watch the paradigm shift of a parent who is now hearing a narrative from a brand that they know very well. Say that if you had any narrative that said stop playing games are a waste of time, that time is gone. Now it's another opportunity. And if it means getting an education at a lower cost or no cost, why would you not support that? Because I'm not interested in saying, come be on these teams and spend 12 hours a day. If you're not making your grades, guess what? You lose your scholarships, period. And so these things are those conversations that I have. They're really about exploring a lot of the mental capacity of prospective students. Because if they can understand that, yes, maybe they may be gifted in a game of actually playing the game, but they may not have realized that their skill sets are applicable in other things that may end up being more obtainable. Because the reality is in traditional sports, you know, being around, you know, number one pick quarterback out of high school, well, there's only one. And those percentages is that's the 1% of the 1%. Right.
And if you want to be, you know, I would say contender level or close to pro level in League of Legends, well, the sea of people playing League of Legends is exponentially bigger than the traditional athletics pools because it's accessible. And so the other thing too is like, let's just be realist right now. If this is what I can recruit you to OU for because it is warrantable, it's better than what we need or have or can help us move that forward, I don't put emphasis on winning games as a metric of success. I put the success of my students' journey to get through college and finish their college career as that success metric at this journey. And the biggest reason for that is, as a mainstream topic, collegiate national championships, not very many people care about them yet. And the majority of my collegiate peers, they're only gaining kind of the clout mentality off of each other. They're not gaining it heavily from administrations from other universities. They're not gaining it from not exclusively gaining it from like city municipalities or bigger organizations. There are some opportunities that we're seeing, things like that, you know, Gen G in Kentucky partnership, what we're seeing at Maryville with the city of St. Louis. You know, they did a full city activation for collegiate, which was great to see. We're starting to see them, but they're still far in between. And another big reason for that is that a lot of the collegiate directors, regardless of the classification of school, they're pretty young. They're majority, I would say, heavily in their mid to barely upper 20s. And there's a lot to learn in the political landscape of an academic university or institution that, one, kind of has some ageism problems and elitist problems just in the nature of trying to convince VPs to do anything. Because a lot of the university administrations will just say, we want esports. I don't want to invest my time in actually embracing its culture. I just want to say we have it as an additional amenity to attend our university. So they're using it as a means to recruit, but not necessarily building it because they're not willing to invest themselves personally into understanding what makes a program successful or empowering the director that they hire to be able to do that for them. They hamstring them because, wait a minute, oh my God, they're playing Call of Duty. This is really violent. I don't understand how to support this. I don't want to do that. Now we just put ourselves in a weird situation because they weren't willing to do the upfront cost or the upfront investment. So those are fun conversations when we talk about recruitment, and they can be, but it's always a conversation of look at the entire landscape, understand that you can do more than just playing the game. If it's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do. Yeah. But as long as I show you that there's doors and that they are open for you, it's your choice whether to walk through them. But most of the time, most of the students have no idea that they can get a scholarship to come to OU to be a shoutcaster or a production person or a journalist or a community TO. Those are all things I need to.
And what I'm hearing from you is to be successful in doing what you've done successfully at OU. It all comes down to that culture and developing that community and it all stems from there to then going to competitive, to scholastic, and to fostering and enabling these people to make money their entire lives doing what they love.
Yep. That's one example I'll make briefly is I had a freshman, just messaged me this morning, who basically built a franchise league in Madden that I didn't even know about or existed. Wow. And he's got a solid 8 to 10 students from OU, other freshmen and sophomore, that have been piloting it, and over 120 people in this franchise league. And I said, awesome. How come you haven't reached out before? I was like, well, we just kind of want to do our own thing. I was like, I get that, but let's have a conversation about it, because I'm not interested in like taking over that or anything like that, but it's something that I can absolutely fortify. Because if I can say that you're an official partner and we support this development, I can benefit from it from the internal needs of OU, and you get more exposure because now I can market that through OU athletics when that eventually comes. And I don't have any heavy programming in that. So again, it's about saying, one, I am bandwidth limited, but if this student is coachable and understands that he's starting to understand some of the business needs that he's falling in or hitting walls with, then there's an opportunity to not only launch a new business formally, but also to empower the student to literally find his career before he even graduates.
So it sounds like there's some learning there around communication and reporting up, and maybe seeing beyond the boundaries that you see today and understanding that you may need help tomorrow and the next day and the things that you don't know yet.
That's always a lifelong learning as we get older anyway. You know, we don't want to hear crap from our parents. I'm sorry. We don't want to hear stuff from our parents or elders or anything like this. It just hits us different versus a friend or a peer or even a stranger who has no context or bias. Yeah. But the other thing too is that going back to one of the very first points I made about the athletics, you know, the athletes who were the jocks that punched the nerds in the face for being gamers, most of these people that are embracing or putting this work in are not used to having any kind of support. So in that culture, you just hunker down and you do it, which is not bad. That's entrepreneurial energy. Right. But even entrepreneurs understand at some juncture, you need help, even if it's just a little bit of help to catapult to your next plateaus. So that's where that comes in, and just saying, hey guys, I don't understand the Madden world great. I want to learn from you, but I also have these other resources to share with you, and that can further elevate your platform. And the only thing that I want in return is active communication. And then understand that I'm a trusted peer in this space, and that's your IP. I don't want OU to own that, but you can help me cultivate something that is OU owned, that's separate and can augment each other. And then later down the road, you graduate. Guess who I'm going to partner with if I need anything for Madden?
Exactly.
And I'm going to pay that company. I'm not going to outsource it. I'm going to go to an alum that was a byproduct of our program.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it's super inspiring, Michael, to hear the way that you've built community. You've supported so many people, both on the academic side as well as the students that you serve every single day. How can people follow you and continue to learn from what you're doing?
Sure. All of our socials are at OU Esports for the departmental organizational stuff, and then ou.edu/esports. Our media outlet is sooneresports.org and .com. Either one will take you there. And then for my personal stuff, which, again, being at a D1, I bite my tongue a lot. But this year I told myself I'm going to start having a bit more presence now that some changes are about to happen and announcements about to drop. Cool. But you can find me on any social channel at Moog Diesel, MOOGDIESEL. And so if anyone has any questions or just wants to share ideas or even debate about some of my standards and doctrine, I welcome those, because again, I don't know everything. And I'm also only using a compass that speaks to the Sooner Nation and what exists in OU. And that's the biggest message that I gave in that TED Talk. And I reiterate it now. What works at one location will more than likely not work more than 50% at another, because Oklahoma is not California, nor is it North Texas or LA or any of these other big kind of areas. And so my story will not exclusively relate to anyone else. A D1 school is a very different thing than a D2 and a D3 or a community college.
Right.
They're not exclusively translatable. And I would honestly argue that 50% at best translates, and that's it. The other 50%, you can't. It's just unique to that campus and its politics.
Well, I love that spirit of openness and your spirit to learn and also share everything that you've learned yourself. I know our audience got a ton from this episode, and look forward to people engaging with you. Very much recommend connecting with Michael to learn much more what he's doing. Michael Aguilar, thank you so much for joining me today on the DLC Drop podcast.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.